Right now, you're wearing something you never think about: a shirt, a jacket, socks. You put them on this morning without a single thought about where the habit came from. But the real answer goes back further than any factory, any loom, any craftsman. It goes back to a garden. Here is what almost nobody sits with long enough to notice. In the beginning, the first man and woman lived without clothing and felt no shame at all, naked and unashamed. That single detail is easy to skim past, but stop on it for a moment. A world where covering yourself was not even a category of thought. No embarrassment, no hiding, nothing to conceal. Then something changed. Not the weather, not the temperature, something inside them. Genesis describes the moment they ate from the tree they were told not to touch. And the very first thing that happened afterward was not punishment. It was awareness. Their eyes were opened, and they realized they were naked. Immediately, they reached for fig leaves and sewed them together to cover themselves. Think about how strange that reaction actually is. Nothing about their bodies had changed. The leaves did nothing to keep them warm. There was no cold to escape. What changed was how they saw themselves. Shame arrived, and covering followed it instantly, like a reflex. That is the real origin point. Not survival against weather. Not a slow climb toward better tools. A single moment of guilt that produced the very first act of clothing a human being ever performed. Why does that detail matter to you today? Because you still do this. Not with fig leaves, but the impulse, the instinct to cover what feels exposed, whether physically or emotionally, is the same one at work in that garden. Psychologist Karen Pine, who has studied how clothing shapes the mind of the person wearing it, found that what covers your body actively changes how you feel about yourself, not just how others perceive you. Cover yourself one way, and you feel small. Cover yourself another way, and you feel steady, capable, ready to face the day. That is not a modern invention. That is ancient pattern still running quietly underneath your closet. The fig leaves, though, were not the end of the story. They were the beginning of a much larger picture. Genesis records something remarkable just a few verses later. God himself made garments of skin for Adam and Eve, and clothed them. Not leaves this time. Skin, a deliberate, crafted covering, made and given rather than improvised out of desperation. Bible scholars have long pointed to this moment as significant for a reason beyond the obvious. Theologian John Sailhamer, who spent decades studying the structure and meaning of Genesis, noted how this act signals a shift from human beings desperately covering their own shame to a covering that was provided for them instead. The fig leaves were their own effort. The garments of skin were something given. That distinction echoes through the rest of the story in ways you might not expect. Covering shame yourself with whatever you have on hand is fragile and temporary. Being clothed by something outside yourself is different entirely, stronger, lasting. It is the difference between hiding and being covered. You feel this same tension today, more than you might realize. There is the version of yourself you construct in public, the outfit, the posture, the careful presentation designed to hide what feels vulnerable underneath. And there is a deeper kind of security that has nothing to do with fabric at all. Notice how much of daily life still runs on this exact instinct. You get dressed every morning, and it is rarely only about temperature. Sociologist Diana Crane, who has studied the meaning behind clothing choices across history, found that what people wear consistently communicates identity, status, and inner state, long before a single word is spoken. A person reaches for a specific shirt before a hard conversation, a specific outfit before a moment that matters. That is not coincidence. That is the same reflex from the garden, dressed up in modern fabric. Here is something else worth noticing. After Adam and Eve were clothed, Genesis describes them leaving the garden entirely, covered, but also changed. The world outside was harder than the one they had known. Thorns, labor, distance from what had once been effortless closeness. Clothing, in that sense, marks a boundary in the story. A before and an after. A world where nothing needed to be hidden, and a world where covering becomes part of being human. That boundary has never really closed. Every piece of clothing you own sits on the same fault line. It protects you from the elements, yes, but it also quietly manages what the world gets to see, and what stays private. Historian Anne Hollander, who researched the cultural meaning of dress extensively, described clothing as something that shapes not just appearance, but the entire relationship between a person's inner life and the outside world. Clothing decides where the line sits between what is shown and what is kept. You draw that line every single day without thinking about it. A sweater on a cold morning, a collared shirt before a meeting, something comfortable and unremarkable on a day you want to disappear into the background. Each choice is a small negotiation between what you are willing to reveal and what you would rather keep covered. Consider the last time you felt exposed. Not necessarily without clothing. Exposed in the sense of being seen too clearly, caught off guard, vulnerable in a way you had not prepared for. What did you reach for? A jacket to hold close, arms crossed over a hoodie, something, anything, between yourself and the moment. That reach is old, older than any wardrobe you have ever owned. It is the same reach Adam and Eve made toward fig leaves in a garden, when shame arrived and covering felt like the only answer. And yet the deeper lesson in that story is not about the leaves at all. It is about what came after them. A covering that was not scrambled together out of fear, but given deliberately, with care, meant to last. That is worth sitting with the next time you get dressed. Somewhere underneath the routine of buttons and sleeves is a much older story about shame, covering, and the difference between hiding and truly being clothed. So tomorrow morning, when you reach for whatever you are about to put on, notice the reflex for what it really is. Not just a habit, not just a practical decision about the weather, an echo of the very first moment a human being ever felt the need to cover themselves at all. You are not just wearing something you never think about. You are wearing the oldest story humanity has ever told about itself.